Today, I'm going to discuss all about the elves and their special connection to animals. Many of you know that if you resonate with the elves, or if you just feel like you're an elven soul on earth and you've always been somebody that has felt that deep within, that you have this special connection to the animals. You understand them. You relate to animals sometimes maybe better than humans even. And this is something that I myself have always felt as well. And so this is something that Tolkien actually kind of picked up on as well, because within the collective, elves represent a state of primordial man. And what that means is it is the place of primitive man, of the very first origins of man, is being in touch and connected to animals. Tolkien, as a Christian, believed that animals and man had a very deep connection from the very beginning times. And he related to the idea of being in the Garden of Eden and being with the animals as the companions that were created alongside man. But what happened was, when man was kicked out of the gardens, like Adam and Eve, then they lost also their connection to animals when they entered upon the material world. They forgot that higher connection to the animals that they had in the Garden of Eden. And that's what Tolkien was trying to show, was that the elves never lost that connection because they were bound to Arda, which is earth. And so I wrote this: man's connection to animals starts at the very beginning, when man's best friend, the dog or wolf, supported early man in hunting and gathering. It is now discovered the reason why humans evolved into farmers and herders later on. It's because of the dog. The dog bridged man and animal together, becoming the first animal to be tamed, to connect with and empathize with, and ultimately became a companion on Earth. And if you have gotten a chance to see the Alpha movie that's out right now on Netflix, I think it came out in 2018, I believe. It is a wonderful example of this relationship that developed between the first primitive humans after the Ice Age, and how the dog or the wolf started to become the first animal that they connected to, that the humans remembered a pure connection to. So the elves represent the spirit of man that never lost that connection to animals. Elves never abuse animals. They never take their anger out on them, and they don't create animal fighting rings, and they don't treat animals cruelly. They don't experiment or torture animals. They don't hunt them or eat them in excessiveness out of balance of their species population. And some elves don't hunt them at all. So elves, as elemental beings made from earth, part of the earth and nature itself, they never lost that connection to animals, because animals also have that special connection to earth. And so they never abuse them or exploit them. But some of humans do. And we know this because we see news articles and we hear stories about it. And it catches those with an elven spirit inside off guard. Like, how can that be a possibility? It's because you don't carry that type of consciousness within you that's disconnected from animals. You came into the world already connected to the animals, just as Tolkien wrote his elves as. It is man that has forgotten this sacred bond to all creatures, and elves empathically, telepathically, and logically bond on a deeper level with animals. And Tolkien himself, he loved animals, because you could see this in his writings, not only The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, but also his other stories as well. They always contained animals. So he himself wrote in a lot of different animals in Middle Earth. And I wrote down a whole list of both mythical and non-mythical animals that appear in his writings. Are you ready for this? It's a long list. But this is how much Tolkien really loved animals. There were the horses, there were bats, bears, all kinds of birds like woodpeckers, gulls, robins, ravens, nightingales, hawks, eagles, swans, crows, and redbirds. There were foxes, deer, rabbits, cats, and dogs, fish, and glowworms, boars, wolves, spiders, donkeys, elephants, ox, dragons, butterflies and dragonflies, apes, ants, cows, camels, bees, flies, moths, narwhals, owls, snails, sheep, sea lions, whales, worms, snakes, zebras, squirrels, crickets, pigs, frogs, fireflies, goats, and lions. I mean, that's a lot of animals that he included. So you could see his mindset was always to include and create his world with animals because he himself enjoyed animals and thought of them, and he put them into his stories. And elves were the guardians and the companions of animals, as well as humans too, but definitely the elves represented that in his stories. I went through to show you particular examples of elves with their animals, and this is going through all the different stories of Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, and going through and seeing how elves related to the animals or how that symbiotic relationship kind of formed. So here it is. These are the examples. And this is how you can tell what elves meant as far as being a representative of this organic connection to nature. So Bureau, which is the Queen of Gondor in early part of Third Age, she was a Numenorian, and Numenor was a place of mixed elven blood and humans. So quite possibly we see this elvish trait of her being able to have conversations with her cats. And she was known to actually talk to her cats and get them to spy on the people in Gondor. And she could read the mind of the cat, it was said, and also the memories of the cats as well. Another example is the eagles of Manwë. So the Vala of the sky, the king of all the Valar, the eagles actually fought alongside the army of the Valar, the Elves, and the Edain during the War of Wrath at the end of the very first age. And this is against Morgoth or Melkor and his dark army in the first age. So the elves were always basically being helped by the eagles and had that connection. And they even had a very polite way of actually saying goodbye to the eagles after the eagles helped fight with them in the army. And this is what they said to the eagles. "Farewell, wherever you fare, till your eyries receive you at the journey's end. May the wind under your wings bear you where the sun sails and the moon walks." That was the Elven blessing to the eagles. So here we see this very deep connection where the elves are not just using the eagles and relating to them as if they were just birds in the sky that had some abilities and gifts that could bring them, some peace and help fight in this war. But they also related to them as if they could understand them, their language, and that they could communicate to them. and that they could do it in a way that they could give a blessing to show their respect. So the elves actually honored and respected the animals as well. Later in the Third Age, because of this relationship between the elves and the eagles, the eagles actually helped the elves of Rivendell and also Radagast, the brown wizard. So the eagles actually settled along the mountains over Rivendell and watched over the land and started to gather news about the orcs. And so this was a way that Elrond and his Rivendell elves received messages. So the eagles were always part of that and helping them. And because of this deep relationship and understanding between the elves and the eagles, this is what allowed them to finally come and help save Frodo and Sam in the end. So the eagles were watching over the land. They were taking part in watching what was going on between the elves and the hobbits, and they understood what was going on as far as Frodo was going to go on this journey. And I'm pretty sure that the eagles even maybe possibly even watched over Frodo and Sam. There's that kind of understanding that the eagles were having a very deep connection to the elves from the very first age. And by the Third Age, that's why they came to rescue, and that's why they were a very important part to the defeat of Sauron. For certain animals, the elves or those of elven blood honor them so much that they become part of their own titles, meaning the House of the Wing, which was one of the 12 houses of Gondolindrim, led by Tuor, father of Arendelle. His house wore swan or seagull feathers on their helmets. And the Lindar, another name for the Teleriels, were considered lords of the gulls, lords of the seagulls. So they even took their titles as well. Excuse me here. And for horses, we know that the elves absolutely had this great respect for the horses, and they even had the elven horses, which were the Maedhros, and they were the ones that only the elves could ride, because they only would allow the elves to ride them because they were the ones that were just a little bit closer to Valinor. And so because of the elven connection to Valinor, there's this deep connection, and this is why those horses only allowed the elves to ride them. But the elves had other horses as well, as we see in the stories, and they were known as their companions and their friends, and of course their mode of travel. They rode them bitless, unlike man did, and with only decorative headstalls and saddles, or without. And Asphaloth, which means sunlit foam, they started to name their horses these really respective, beautiful titles. And this was the famous horse of Glorfindel. And in the book, that was Glorfindel's part of riding Asphaloth and helping Frodo to get to Rivendell. And in the movie, it was Arwen on Asphaloth. And it showed this really deep connection to the elven mind and the elven rider. And as Glorfindel tells Frodo that Asphaloth will listen to him if he tells him to keep Frodo on him and to ride swift. And that's when you see him say, Noralim, Noralim, Asphaloth. And Asphaloth will do as he tells him because of this very deep connection and this understanding towards one another. If he says to keep Frodo safe, then Asphaloth will. And Tolkien confirmed that Glorfindel would never use a bridle and a bit when riding Asphaloth. Instead, he would only use an ornamental headstall with a feather, jewels, and small bells. And that is in Tolkien's letters about the elves that I read about, he kind of confirmed that elves would never do certain things that humans would to their horses. And so there's this greater understanding about freedom to animals as well, which is really important, because not only do elves kind of keep animals as, their companions or helpers, but there's a sense of giving them freedom too, and not tethering them too much to them. Also, Arod was a horse of the Rohan riders of Man, and Legolas, we see, who's the elven prince of Mirkwood, spoke Elvish to the horse when it was too scared to pass the path of the dead leading to the dark door, when Aragorn was going to get the help of the dead, basically, to help him and fight with him against Sauron. What Legolas did, very descriptively, was that Legolas put his hands over the horse's eyes, because the horse was trembling and didn't want to go through the path of the dead. So he put his hand over the horse's eyes and he held it there, and he spoke Elvish to him very sweetly and softly, really close to him, showing the horse that he was not alone in this, and that he was right there with him, and giving him strength and courage, basically, to go through this path of the dead. The next example I saw was Melian as an elvish Maya. And a Maya is a little bit more of a higher level form of an elf, basically, closer to that of more of an angelic spirit. That's kind of what a Maya was. And Melian was one that was also elvish, but she was a Maya. And it was said that she had nightingales always around her, and that she would actually teach them their songs to sing. And so animals would actually learn from the elves, not just share their own gifts or their own songs, but Melian actually had this ability to help further progress the evolution of the animals around her. And it was always said that nightingales were always circling around her head as she was sitting in her throne in Mengaroth, which is the city in the land of Doriath, the home of the Sindarian elves. And moths were seen flying above Luthien's head while she danced. And Tolkien said she, being a fairy, minded them not, as many of the children of men do. So he's trying to say that some children might swat at the moths and they might be annoyed. I mean, we know some humans sometimes, they look at certain flies or moths, bees, and they swat them away. But Luthien didn't mind because she was a fairy. And that is this deep connection where it's allowing the freedom of the animals, trusting the animals, and really just being fully present and not wanting to force their will upon the animals. So that's why all these animals were always circling around their heads or flying about them, because they knew that it was a safe space. And swans were allies of the Ainur and elves. Swans were actually used to draw the ships of the Teleri elves to Amen of Valinor, without the help of the wind on windless days for the elves. So swans, really large, great swans, were the ones that were actually pulling the ships when there was no wind to sail off to Valinor. And these examples give many indications of this symbiotic relationship with animals, where the elves depended on the animals and the animals depended on the elves, but there was also this sense of give and take of freedom too. And the elves' gentle treatment of them and the respect of them allowed use of their individual gifts and skills that they each had as animals. One of the examples I wrote down was there was this wolfhound named Huon which was one of the dogs of Orome. He was one of the hunting dogs of Orome because Orome was the Vala of hunt. And this is an example from Luthien's and Baron's story, which is a very long poem, and you can actually find it if you want. It's a wonderful story. And this is what it said, which gives an indication of this really deep connection with the dog Huon. At Luthien's feet, there day by day, and at night, beside her, would stay Huon, the hound of Nargothrond, and words she spoke to him soft and fond. O Huon, Huon, swiftest hound, that ever ran on mortal ground, what evil doth thy lords possess, to heed no tears nor my distress? One sparrow here, all men above, good hounds did cherish and did love. Once baron in the friendless north, when outlaw wild he wandered forth, had friends among many things, with fur and fell, and feathered wings, and among the spirits that in stone in mountains old and wastes alone still dwell. So she's talking to this dog that's lying at her feet, kind of guarding her and keeping her company. And she's just, having this full-on conversation. So if you're somebody that feels like they could talk to their dog or their cat or any pet that they have, or even just animals, like as you're walking in nature, and you might just see a squirrel or a rabbit. Last night, there was a rabbit in the playground in a school that I work in, and there was a really large dog, and I saw and noticed how the rabbit was like scurrying about, so scared. And I actually talked to the owner of the big dog, and I said, you can't be in this playground area, because dogs should not be in children's playgrounds anyway. They leave a mess, and the kids step in them the next day. So I was like, you can't be in this playground. And I did that only to allow the escape of the bunny, because I could tell that the bunny was scared. And I spoke to the bunny and I said, I'm going to get that dog out of here. And the bunny stopped and looked at me and listened. And when I went over on the other side and got the dog and the owner left, then the bunny scampered off. So this is something that you may do if you have this elven spirit. If this is just who you are and who you came into the world to be, you might have full-on conversations with animals. And it is not something that makes you crazy or delusional. It is your deeper understanding and connection to animals that animals may not be able to speak back in English. Even Yuan could only speak 3 times. He was allowed to speak back in Elvish or in the language that Luthien could understand only 3 times. That's it. So animals cannot maybe speak back in English to you or in your language that you know, but they will understand you. And this is where humans are going to awaken to more, because as they awaken to love and unity with all things and each other, then there's going to be this deeper understanding and connection to animals too. So I wanted to give you kind of my personal story, another one, of what happened with my dog Neo and how I calmed him down. And I didn't even know that the elves did this too. But if you do the same thing, and I'll get to elven healing of animals in the next part here, but I actually helped my dog out of a seizure, because it was about, I think it was like 2 weeks ago, almost 2 weeks ago, my 7-year-old deer-head chihuahua, which you see a lot on my videos. He's always sitting somewhere in the corner. I've even had him on my lap. He's a very gentle dog, and I really love his personality. Each animal, as if you have them as pets, they have these different personalities. And I have 2 dogs, and they have very different personalities. And Neo is a very gentle, deer-like dog. It's perfect name for him, deer-head chihuahua. He actually looks like a little small deer. He's very frail, and he shakes a lot, and he's really nervous, and he's always seeking my heat. And I love him dearly. And he started to get he was sitting over on top of a pillow by my head, and I was watching a movie, or I was blogging. I was doing something, and he came over to my side and he tried to like get underneath my legs, my lap. And he was doing this weird shaking, and I was like, what is going on? And I don't want him to go under my legs. I'm always like afraid I'm going to squish him. So I picked him up and I put him on the ground. I was like, nope, get off the couch, be independent for a second here. And then I noticed that he was moving strangely, almost like his legs were paralyzed and he couldn't fully extend his legs. So I picked him up and I put him back on the couch. And that's when he started to do this swimming. If you ever have experienced an animal having a neurological seizure, their nerves just are firing off and they start kind of swimming. It's like a swimming motion with their hands or with their paws and with their legs. And it might come in a different way, but mine definitely looked like he was swimming. That's a normal symptom of a seizure. And it was really scary because my dog also has a form of like asthma. He's had it from birth. And he was like actually always having a hard time breathing. And I would hold his little nostrils and I would get him to breathe through his mouth, or I would calm him down and speak really soothingly to him, hold him still, and just tell him how much I love him. And this would calm his breathing in the past. So I noticed that he was not able to breathe. He was having like an asthma attack and a seizure at the same time. And it was extremely scary because his breath was coming. I can only demonstrate it for you to understand, but it was like, and he was kicking, and I was holding him, and I was holding him in my arms because I was holding him still so that he wasn't like going to hurt himself. And I had this mind-to-mind connection with him, and I was speaking out loud as well. And I was like, please don't leave me yet. I'm not ready for you to go. But if you're really tired, I love you so much. And thank you for everything. I was ready to let him go if he needed to, because the way he was gasping for air, it was like his spirit was on the verge to leave. Like I felt that while holding him. And in my mind, I saw like galaxies, and I saw that he was like trying to go towards like, the afterlife. And I held him and I spoke words of love and I tried to soothe him. And eventually he came out of it, and he looked around and his eyes were really wide and he was so scared. He did not leave my side. He sat on my lap. Eventually his breath returned to normal and he just stayed by my side. And I just let him know how much I loved him and how special he always was to me. And this is something that the elves have done in Tolkien stories. So this is something that's very collectively true about elven spirits and elven energy, is that when we can heal animals, we will do our best and try, because we don't want them in suffering or pain. And we also have this idea of, spirit, and this idea that animals too will go on to the afterlife, and it's about giving them their freedom when they are ready to leave from here, and understanding when an animal gets really old and tired. What happens to a dog especially is when they're ready to die, they actually go away from you and they find like a corner, or they try to go somewhere. But Neo, he was actually seeking my comfort. So even though I was ready to let him go if he needed to, I also understood that he was possibly not quite there yet. And that's why I was willing to work with him. Something that's a very apparent in Middle Earth as well as Earth, to me as an elven soul, is the idea that elves understand that animals are actually their soulmates. A form of a soulmate, that certain animals that you meet and become your pets, or that you have some kind of meeting with outside of your house, They are spirit guides or messengers. They can be totems, as I talked about in another video on animal totems and messengers. But the ones that stay with you for a while, for a few years or many years, if you're lucky, they're your soulmates. They are companions on this journey, and you are here to learn from them. Each of those soulmates will have some kind of special personality and unique gift to give you. And if you listen to them, if you learn how to love them and take care of them in the way that is best for them individually, they will teach you something. They will teach you about yourself and ultimately more of the love within yourself and what you are capable of. And I really do feel that. I actually wrote this about elven healing of animals. Elves were known to treat respected animals as same as their fellow elves. They would use special healing herbs like athalas and use a form of elvish reiki, laying their hands on the bodies of animals, singing and reciting small prayers of love and blessings from Valinor. The story of Huan is that when Huan was protecting Luthien and Beren from basically Morgoth in a form of a giant wolf and some other beings, what ended up happening was Huan became actually mortally wounded. And even though Luthien and Beren got away, and well, Beren was not, he was also mortally wounded as well. But there's another story to that. But Huan became mortally wounded. And even though they defeated Morgoth and Luthien and Beren were okay to go back to the land of Doriath, that's where Luthien was from, Huan actually died with Luthien and Beren's hands on him. So they were trying to heal him. They were trying to give their blessings in some form, but Huan's spirit was just so tired and had to leave. And eventually Huan went to the halls of Mandos and Valinor and, went back to the afterlife. And this is something that Tolkien wrote about, and I find it very interesting. If you ever have a near-death experience, and I did in my own way, I actually saw faces of not only my loved ones, like humans, like my husband and my dad, but also I saw my dog. I saw just an image of Neo, because I didn't have Minnie yet. And I have seen and have heard that many people that have actually gone through the gates that I did not go through and went to like the valley of heaven and have experienced this place of light and like love and this whole new realm, there's always animals there. There's always animals there. So there's this understanding that animals too will actually enter into the afterlife with you. And I really do feel that. I feel that all of our soulmates that are animals will also be there because they're part of our consciousness. We are one with the animals. And so if we love them dearly, if they're part of our essence and, they're part of our special spiritual journey, I believe that we will see them again. And this is why in near-death experiences, many people experience their past pets actually meeting them on the rainbow, the rainbow bridge, basically it's called, is that transitioning bridge to the afterlife. So that's something very, very comforting to see that collectively shared, this is an experience that we are seeing. And Tolkien wrote that Huan also went off to the afterlife as well. And elves are known to hold deep conversations with animals, knowing on some level that they will understand them. So not just short commands like sit or beg or, don't do that. It's not about these shorter commands. It's about actually having this full-on intelligent conversation about life with animals. And, sometimes I do that, and I do see Minnie like cock her head and she's trying to understand. And Neo just kind of looks at me deeply. There's a part of them that understands because they can read your energy in your words. Animals have this ability to read energy of people. And this is why they are able to tell if a person has good intentions or bad intentions. And if they're in a place where they can be free, they can choose to get away from that person, or they bark at the person, they warn people. But it is also about the personality of the dog too. So not everybody that gets barked at is bad. It's just, where is the dog's comfort level with new people? And this is why dogs are very territorial, and anybody that comes near their owner, they may just bark at randomly. But animals in general, especially the ones that have been tamed by humans, meaning that they are the ones that have reached this deeper connections with humans because they have been living with them in their home. They have been taken in, given shelter and food and care and love. Over time, this has helped animals actually evolve their state of consciousness. And so today in 2020, the domesticated animals, the ones that humans from all that past life times have been with, these are the animals that can truly understand you when you speak. In some form, they can read your energy, and they can tell when you're down, when you need a friend, a companionship. It's very common for a cat or a dog to come by their owner when they're crying or depressed or sad, because they can read the need of the human. They actually can read the energies, and they could supplement it with their own loving energies, because something that's wonderful about animals is that they're always present. They're not focused on the future. They're not focused on the past. They represent this present essence that humans actually can learn from. Animals are just happy to be right there, playing with that toy or being pet. They are not thinking about the future goals or desires, and they're not wallowing in pity and regret about the past. They are simply there, happy to be right by your side. And this is something that we can learn. We can always be reminded of. And I think that is something that the elves knew, was that this very deep connection really was there between the animals and the elves, and humans can have it too. And it's something that the elves even taught the humans in Middle Earth, and even showed later on, to like the kingdom of Gondor, and as far as teaching the elvish crafts and arts to those humans that had a little bit of elven blood in them. So Aragorn was one of those examples of the Dunedain who could have that type of elvish connection to animals as well. And I feel that this is really important. I'm happy to do this video because maybe it will be a reminder to you all that those of you that have this really deep connection to your pets, or to any animal that you see outside of your home walking in the forest, that's something that's very common, and it's very reflective of who you are as an elven soul, as a fairy soul. And that's just in your blueprint. It's just who you came into the earth to be. So, have solace in that, knowing that that's completely normal. And if you want to cultivate those abilities and gifts more, then practice your conversation and your healing skills with your animal companions. And, you can go deeper into this now that maybe you are aware of it. Once you become aware of it, you can go deeper into it. And this kind of awareness started to awaken in me over the years with my particular dog, Neo. And because he was my first dog, I always had cats. I've had about 4 cats in my life. and they've lived with me for a long time, but Neo was my very first dog. And so this kind of awoken this really interesting connection, although I had a very deep connection with my cats too. But it just kind of opened up this ability in me to hold conversations and experience a different type of energy, because dogs and cats give out different energies, and I love them both equally. As long, I love all animals, but this is something that I think going forward humanity can take into consideration, is if they can give animals their freedom and their respect, they may be able to utilize some of the gifts that animals have. So not completely maybe vegan, where you're completely leaving animals alone, but possibly just this symbiotic relationship where animals and humans share with each other. And if they can do it in a way where it's respectful of their freedom, this is really kind of the goal. And the idea about the industrialization of farming and, people are switching to eating less meat or not eating meat at all. And this is really going to help, because the whole farming type of industrialization or economy has really changed the connection that animals have with humans. Some humans now just look at certain animals as food only. And so there's this loss of connection. And when we get back to giving animals more of their freedom and this respect to them, that's when we'll get back to this Elven primordial, connection to them, that even the early Homo sapiens had, and this is something that the primitive man had, but something got disconnected along the way. And so many of us have come into this earth to remind people of that connection again. And this is only going to help our world because of this greater connection to animals. Humans may not realize this, but on a psychic level and in the actual emotional body, there is a connection to animals suffering and pain. And so when we see animals in pain, such as, the Australia bushfires and the way that they're treated in these factories for food, when we hear about that and when we see that, it actually gets absorbed into our being, because there's this oneness factor. And so the reason why humans may feel kind of down, or there's this kind of stress and distress, is because of the psychic connection with animals. When more animals reach a place of peaceful living and non-suffering states, where death is a natural cycle, or death is something that is more about honor and respect, then this is where humans will start to get back a place of inner peace within themselves. This is very important, because this is about having humans reach that state of bliss and peace. And so, one person is not going to do it all, but we are all connected. So any work that you personally do to deepen your connection to animals, to alleviate suffering as you can, to help animals when you can, to be a friend, to give love, to mirror that back to animals as they mirror to us, this really deep state of love, then this is what's going to help put out that energy into the world. And everything is all connected, and it will have an effect. It will have an effect. And I believe that is a happier vision for the future that we can have. And I just wrote down this, that animals are our soulmates, bound to you, that you learn from, you can grow with, you can have this experience of greater love with. And they keep us going even when we have given up ourselves. They see our pure spirit, they recognize our goodness, or they recognize our evil intent. and they are our mirrors to us and all who face them. And so I think that I will end there. So I'll take some comments, and let's see, we have here. This is great. I'm so glad you joined me. As you saw in my first comment there, all super chat donations, if you want to click on that, they will go to the Best Friends Animal Society, which I have donated to before in the past, and I would like to keep on donating to them as well as a nonprofit organization of the Elven spiritual path, because they run the largest no-kill shelter in the US, and they actually promote adoption, because something that also has caused a disconnect is this shelter and pet type of cycle, where some humans, when they get a pet and no longer the pet can satisfy them in the way they want, or the pet gets too old or something, then they're given to a shelter. And a lot of the shelters in the past would kill or put to sleep animals because they could be so many of them and they don't have room. But there is more of a stronger movement now to keep animals all the way until, their natural deaths, and to promote the idea of adoption rather than breeding, because we have a lot of animals that are homeless. And so I think that it's really important to support these people. Best Friends Society, you can look them up and read about them. They've done some really great things for animals. So thank you so much for joining. I see all of these really great comments here. I like that. Lady Goldberry, Numenorian is code for automatic badass. Yeah, because there's that elvish blood, but then there's that human quality as well. And it's just a form of the humans having that elvish art and crafts. And yes, they were badass until the fall of them, which you can read about. Okay, so Lori Amen says, I think it's amazing that animal communication is getting more and more well known. My husband did a workshop, and another friend of mine is also certified and a healer. That's great. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, actually, I'm going to do a video on a more deeper connection to animals in terms of just healing, and I hope to get more into that. But this is really just to go through and show you what Tolkien said about his elves so that you can relate to that. But that is wonderful. I'm really happy to hear that. Yeah, it's true. Like, more people are feeling like it's okay to have conversations with their animal friends, or, it's not weird. It's actually, they understand that the animals can understand them, maybe at a limited point, but they can definitely read their energy. And Dad just helped an injured eagle on the side of the road and stayed with him till a raptor specialist came. Not all animal control can work with raptors. Well, that's great. Good. I'm happy your dad helped the eagle. That's really important. Yeah, I've tried to help a lot of animals in my past, because that's something I just cannot do. I cannot walk by an animal in suffering. And I love seeing these videos of so many different people, like, finding animals, being injured and them helping them. It's just the greatest thing. It really shows the full potential of love, and it's something, I think it's enough to redeem humanity in a very deep spiritual way. So yes, this is great. You guys have wonderful comments, and thank you so much who joined in today. I really appreciate it. It was great to see all of you. And cats cafes are my new favorite thing in the world. Yes. Yes, that's great. Yeah, cat cafes are wonderful. Yeah, I hope to see more of this interconnection between animals and humans. Like, it's going to be really exciting to see in the future. And I just think that the more and more people that promote, having more respect and care for animals, whether you be vegetarian like me or vegan, or whether you be someone that really just finds a good balance of being both respectful and not taking an excess is really how we get back to our connection with animals. And like I said, it really is going to help us all feel much better inside. Those that suffer with animals and are depressed because we see animals in pain, and those that may be unaware of how they treat animals, and something just doesn't go right for them in life. Like they just don't feel right because they abuse dogs, or they they hurt animals, or they hunt them for no reason. Something in their life just doesn't quite work. Maybe they can't find a true love. Maybe they can't, because when you are harmful towards something that's already connected to you, you're already doing harm to your own self. It's really true, the way that humans relate to animals. They must see that and understand that we are one with the animals. And Tolkien knew that and made his elves represent that oneness so that we can all see that example and be inspired by it. So have a wonderful day, and I hope you will join me for my next video on Saturday.